I was a waitress who defended an elderly veteran from a thug in my diner, not knowing I'd just caught the attention of his son, the most feared mafia boss in the city. What would you do when the man everyone fears offers you protection, passion, and a place in his dangerous world? I've been waiting tables at Gino's Diner for 8 years now. Not the life I dreamed of at 35, but it pays the bills while I work on my book during breaks. The smell of coffee and bacon fills the air every morning, mixing with the sharp scent of cleaning supplies. My feet hurt in these old shoes, but I've gotten used to it. This is my life now, wiping down sticky tables, filling coffee cups, and smiling even when I don't feel like it. Every morning at exactly 8:15, Mr. Salvatore walks in. He's 82 years old with hands that shake a little and kind eyes that have seen too much. He always sits at the same booth by the window where the morning sun warms his thin shoulders. He orders the same thing, black coffee and rye toast, and leaves a $5 tip even though his meal only costs $3.75. "Morning, Mr. Salvatore," I say, pouring his coffee without asking. "Morning, Ellie," he replies, with his gentle smile that makes the deep lines around his eyes crinkle. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" These little talks are the best part of my day. They make me feel less alone. My tiny apartment is just 3 blocks away. It's too small, barely 400 square feet, with a window that looks at a brick wall and a shower that runs cold after 5 minutes. At night, I can hear my neighbors fighting through the thin walls. My savings account has only $342.17 in it, and my dreams feel further away with each birthday candle I blow out. I write during my breaks, sitting in the back booth with a cup of coffee gone cold. I've been working on the same story for 2 years now. Some days the words flow, but most days they hide from me, and I stare at the same paragraph for my whole 30-minute break. "Still writing that book?" asks Dina, the cook who's worked here even longer than me. She flips pancakes with one hand and stirs gravy with the other. "Still trying," I answer, closing my notebook as a family of 5 walks in, the kids loud and bouncy. The diner fills and empties like the tide. The lunch crowd comes in hungry and leaves full. I count my tips. $27 today, not bad, and watch the clock tick toward closing time. Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, this loop of wake up, work, sleep, repeat. My mother used to say I was meant for bigger things, but now she's gone, and I'm still here, trapped in a life that feels too small for the dreams I once had. What I don't know, as I wipe down tables and refill salt shakers, is that tomorrow everything will change. Tomorrow, someone will walk through that door who will pull me into a world I never imagined. Tomorrow, my small, safe life will shatter like the coffee mug Mr. Salvatore is about to drop, and nothing will ever be the same again. Tuesday started like any other day. The morning sun slipped through the blinds and woke me before my alarm clock could. My back ached from the thin mattress, and my dreams clung to me like cobwebs as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. The neighbor's baby cried through the wall, right on time. I showered in lukewarm water, dressed in my blue uniform with the little coffee stain on the pocket, and walked the 3 blocks to Gino's Diner. The cook was already there, his big hands working dough for the morning biscuits. The smell of butter and flour filled the warm kitchen. I tied my apron around my waist, checked my pockets for pens, and started the coffee. The routine was so familiar I could do it with my eyes closed. Turn on the machines, wipe down the tables, fill the sugar containers, check the napkin holders, set out the clean mugs. By 7 hours, the early birds were trickling in. The truck drivers who wanted breakfast before hitting the highway. The nurses coming off night shift with tired eyes. The construction workers in their dusty boots. I knew most of their orders by heart. "Morning, Ellie," they'd say, and I'd smile and pour coffee without asking. The minutes ticked by. 8 came, and I found myself glancing at the door every few moments, waiting for Mr. Salvatore. When the clock hit 8:15 exactly, the little bell above the door jingled, and there he was. The old veteran walked slowly to his usual booth, newspaper tucked under one arm, his cane tapping softly on the floor. Today he wore his navy blue sweater despite the warm weather. His wedding ring glinted in the morning light, though his wife had been gone for years. "Morning, Mr. Salvatore," I said, already pouring his coffee. "Morning, Ellie," he replied with that gentle smile. "How's the book coming along?" "Slow but sure," I answered, setting down his cup. "Rye toast today?" He nodded, opening his newspaper. His reading glasses perched on his nose, making him look like the grandfather I never had. I put his order in and went to check on my other tables. The diner hummed with conversation and the clink of forks against plates. At 8:30, the bell above the door rang again. 3 men walked in, laughing too loudly for the morning. My stomach tightened at the sight of them. They wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in our simple diner. The tallest one had slicked back hair and a flashy gold watch that caught the light when he moved. His cologne was so strong I could smell it from across the room, something spicy and too much. They took a booth near the back, spreading out like they owned the place. I grabbed menus and walked over, keeping my smile fixed in place. "Coffee?" I asked. "3 coffees, sweetheart," said the tall one, not even looking at me. He loosened his tie and leaned back, his eyes scanning the diner like he was looking for someone. As I walked away to get their coffee, I felt a chill, despite the warm kitchen. Something about them felt wrong, like a storm cloud on a sunny day. I filled 3 mugs and carried them back, careful not to spill. The men ordered big breakfasts without saying please or thank you. I nodded and wrote it down, turning to take the order to the kitchen. That's when it happened. The tall man stood up to take off his suit jacket. He turned too quickly and bumped right into Mr. Salvatore's table. The coffee spilled, dark and hot, across the newspaper and onto the old man's lap. Mr. Salvatore jumped a little, surprised by the sudden heat. "Watch it, old man," the tall guy sneered, not even trying to help clean up the mess he made. The diner got quieter. I grabbed a towel and hurried over, but Mr. Salvatore was already dabbing at his wet pants with his napkin. His hands shook more than usual. "Excuse me," Mr. Salvatore said quietly, looking up at the man. "You bumped my table." The tall man's face changed. His smile disappeared like someone had wiped it off. His eyes got hard and cold like little stones. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice low and scary. Mr. Salvatore didn't back down. He'd fought in wars. He wasn't afraid of bullies. I said, "You bumped my table. An apology would be nice." What happened next plays in my head over and over when I close my eyes. The tall man's face turned red with anger. His hand moved so fast I couldn't stop it. The sound of his open palm hitting Mr. Salvatore's cheek cracked like a gunshot in the quiet diner. Everyone froze. The old man's glasses flew off and clattered to the floor. A red mark bloomed on his pale cheek. He looked so small in that moment, so fragile. I don't remember deciding to move. One second I was standing there, coffee pot in hand, and the next I was between them, my back to Mr. Salvatore, facing the tall man. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My hands shook, but my voice came out anyway. "Get out," I said. "Get out right now or I'm calling the police." The tall man looked surprised, then amused. His friends stood up behind him. One of them cracked his knuckles. The other just smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "You've got some nerve," the tall one said, reaching for my arm. The bell above the door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. The sound made everyone jump and turn. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun so I couldn't see his face clearly at first. He wore a dark gray suit that fit him perfectly. He wasn't very tall, but everyone in the diner seemed to shrink as he stepped inside. Even the three troublemakers got quiet. "Marco," the tall man whispered, suddenly pale as a ghost. The name hung in the air like smoke. Marco Salvatore. I'd heard whispers about him, but never connected the name to my gentle, regular customer. Marco walked to our table, his steps slow and deliberate. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder and looked at the man who'd slapped him. His eyes were dark and cold as winter nights. "You touched my father," he said quietly. The words were simple but filled with a promise that made the tall man step back. "We'll discuss this elsewhere." The three men filed out without another word, Marco's eyes following them. When they were gone, he turned to me. I suddenly realized I was still holding the coffee pot like a weapon. I lowered it slowly. "Thank you for defending him," Marco said, his eyes studying me in a way that made me feel like he could see right through me. "Not many would stand up to men like that." "Anyone would have," I mumbled, feeling my cheeks grow hot under his gaze. "No," he said, a hint of something like respect in his voice. "They wouldn't." He helped his father up, picked up the glasses from the floor, and gently placed them back on the old man's face. Then he left money on the table, too much money, and guided his father toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at me. "I won't forget this," he said. The door closed behind them, the little bell jingling cheerfully as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But as I stood there with coffee soaking into my shoes, I knew everything had just changed. I just didn't know how much. The next day, Mr. Salvatore didn't come to the diner. His empty booth by the window made my heart sink a little. I kept looking at the door every time the bell jingled, hoping to see his kind face, but he never showed up. The red mark on his cheek from yesterday's slap kept floating in my mind like a bad dream. When my shift ended at 3, I walked home under gray clouds that threatened rain. The wind pushed trash across the street and made my uniform flutter against my legs. 3 blocks felt longer today. My feet hurt, and my thoughts were heavy with worry about the old man. As I turned the corner onto my street, I stopped. A black car sat right in front of my apartment building. It was long and shiny, like something from a movie, with windows so dark I couldn't see inside. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. People like me didn't get visitors in cars like that. A man in a black suit stepped out from the driver's side. He was tall with wide shoulders and a face that didn't smile. His eyes scanned the street before landing on me. "Miss Eleanor Price?" he asked in a deep voice. My mouth went dry. "Yes?" "Mr. Salvatore requests your company." My heart jumped. "Is he okay? What hospital is he in?" The man's face didn't change. Not the father. The son. Oh. A chill ran through me despite the warm spring air. The driver opened the back door of the car and waited. "I didn't ask for a ride," I said, clutching my purse tighter. "Mr. Salvatore insists," he replied, standing perfectly still. A smart person would say no. A smart person would turn around and walk away. A smart person would not get into a stranger's car, especially when that stranger worked for someone who made people whisper when they said his name. But I found myself thinking about Mr. Salvatore's kind eyes, about how he asked about my book every day, about how small he looked when that man hit him. And somehow, my feet started moving toward the car. The inside smelled like leather and something clean, like fancy soap. The seats were soft and cool against my legs. The driver closed the door with a soft thump that sounded final, like the period at the end of a sentence. We drove through parts of the city I rarely visited, past tall buildings with shiny windows, past stores with names I couldn't pronounce, past parks where people walked dogs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The rain started, fat drops hitting the windows and blurring the world outside. After 20 minutes, we stopped in front of a restaurant with a dark green awning. The name Bellini's was written in gold letters on the door. A small sign in the window said closed, but the driver walked me to the door anyway. He knocked 3 times, and someone opened it from inside. We stepped into dim light and the smell of garlic and wine. The restaurant was empty of customers, the tables covered with white cloths that glowed in the soft light. My work shoes squeaked a little on the shiny floor, making me feel even more out of place. At a table in the back sat Marco Salvatore. He wore a dark blue suit and was reading something on his phone. He looked up when we approached, his face serious and hard to read. He stood as I got closer, a gesture that surprised me. "Miss Price," he said, his voice lower than I remembered. "Thank you for coming." "Your driver didn't make it sound optional," I answered, my voice a little shaky. A tiny smile touched his lips. "Please, sit." I sat across from him, suddenly very aware of my wrinkled uniform and messy hair. He waved his hand, and a waiter appeared with 2 glasses of red wine. "You're probably wondering why I asked you here," Marco said, watching me closely. "I'm wondering why I came," I countered, surprised by my own boldness. He smiled then, a real smile that changed his whole face. For a second, he looked younger, less scary. "My father speaks highly of you. He says you're the only person who treats him like a human being, not just another old man." I thought about Mr. Salvatore and his quiet dignity. "He's a good person." "Yes," Marco agreed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Much better than his son." I should have been scared sitting across from this man. People crossed the street to avoid his shadow. His name made grown men nervous, but instead I felt a strange calm, like I'd stepped into a dream where normal rules didn't apply. "How is he?" I asked. "Your father, I mean. After yesterday." "He's okay." His pride was hurt more than his face. Marco's eyes hardened. "The men who did that won't bother him, or anyone, again." The way he said it made me shiver. I didn't want to know what happened to those men. "Why am I here, Mr. Salvatore?" I asked directly. "Marco?" he corrected. "Call me Marco." He leaned forward a little. "I need someone I can trust to look after him sometimes. Someone who isn't connected to my business. I'm a waitress, not a nurse." "You're more than that," he said, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "You're someone who stood up for an old man when it would have been easier not to. That tells me a lot about who you are." A warm feeling spread through my chest at his words, though I tried not to show it. What would I have to do? Just spend time with him. Take him for walks. To the movies, maybe. He gets lonely in that big house, and I'm often busy. I thought about my empty apartment, about my half-written book that no one would ever read, about my life that seemed stuck in place while the world moved on without me. "He'd pay you, of course," Marco added, mistaking my silence for reluctance. "It's not about money," I said quickly, then felt my cheeks get hot. "I mean, I do need money, but that's not why I'd do it." "Then why would you do it?" I looked down at my hands. "Because he reminds me of my grandfather. Because he's kind to me. Because he deserves better than what happened yesterday." Marco studied me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once, like he'd made a decision. "Can you start tomorrow? I'll send a car at 10. "I work until 3. "Not anymore." He pulled out his phone. "What's your boss's name?" "Wait. What?" I blinked at him. "You can't just... I can arrange for you to have mornings free. You'll still be paid for full shifts. But that's a simple solution," he finished for me. "Unless you want to quit entirely? I can pay you more than the diner does." My head was spinning. "I don't want special treatment. I don't want to quit. I just want to help your father." Marco looked at me curiously, like I was a puzzle he couldn't figure out. Most people would take the money. I'm not most people. The words came out stronger than I felt. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. No, you're not. That smile did something strange to my insides, something I didn't want to think about. I looked away, taking a sip of wine I didn't really want. I should go, I said, setting down the glass. I have an early shift tomorrow. Marco didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and stood when I did. The car will take you home. As we walked to the door, his hand hovered near my lower back, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. At the door, he stopped. Miss Price. Eleanor, he said, his voice softer. My father's world. My world. It can be different from what you're used to. There are rules, expectations. I'm just going to keep an old man company, not join the family business, I said, trying to make a joke. Marco didn't laugh. Even so. Be careful. The way he said it made it sound like a warning. As the car drove me home through the rain, I wondered what I'd just agreed to. I'd crossed some invisible line, stepped through a door I couldn't close behind me. Part of me was scared. But another part, a part I didn't recognize, was excited. Hungry for whatever might come next, whatever might break the dull pattern of my days. Tomorrow, I'd see Mr. Salvatore. Antonio, I should call him now. Tomorrow, I'd step further into their world. And though I didn't know it yet, tomorrow would be the first day of a new life I couldn't have imagined if I'd tried. The black car came for me at 10 o'clock sharp the next morning. It had rained all night, and puddles reflected the gray sky as I stepped outside, my heart beating a little faster than normal. The same driver opened the door without a word. This time, I didn't hesitate before getting in. We drove through the city and then up winding roads to a part of town where the houses sat far apart from each other. Trees lined the streets, their branches making green tunnels over the road. Finally, we stopped in front of tall black gates that opened slowly as we approached. The house beyond them made me gasp. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion, with stone walls and big windows that caught the morning light. Flowers grew in neat beds along the curving driveway. A fountain bubbled in the middle of a circle of white gravel where the car stopped. Mr. Salvatore is in the garden, the driver said, opening my door. He pointed to a path that led around the side of the house. I followed it, my shoes crunching on the tiny stones. The air smelled sweet from the flowers, and birds sang in the trees. It felt like a different world from my noisy street with its trash cans and car horns. The garden spread out behind the house in neat squares of green and color. And there, sitting on a wooden bench in the sunshine, was Antonio Salvatore. He wore a straw hat to shield his face, and he was feeding breadcrumbs to little brown birds that hopped around his feet. He looked up as I approached, and his face broke into a wide smile. "Ellie!" he called, waving me over. Come, meet my little friends." I sat beside him on the bench. Up close, the bruise on his cheek showed yellow and purple against his pale skin. It made my stomach tighten with anger all over again. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Ah, this?" He touched his cheek gently. "It's nothing. At my age, I've had worse. But you, what are you doing here? Marco said you'd be coming, but I didn't believe him. He asked me to keep you company sometimes." I watched the birds peck at the crumbs by our feet. "If that's okay with you?" Antonio laughed, a warm sound that made me smile too. "Okay? It's wonderful. I get so bored with just these old bones for company. And Marco, he's always busy. We spent that morning walking slowly through the garden while Antonio told me about each plant and flower. His voice grew stronger as he talked, and his hands moved in the air to shape his words. He wasn't just an old man in a diner anymore. Here, in his garden, he was full of life and stories. "You must come and see my roses next week," he said, pointing to buds that weren't yet open. "They'll be beautiful." Next week. The words settled in my chest like warm stones. I would be coming back. After lunch on the patio, sandwiches with fresh bread and cheese that tasted better than anything from the diner, Antonio showed me old photos in a leather album. "Here's Marco when he was 10, he said, pointing to a serious-faced boy in a school uniform. "Already so responsible? Too responsible for a child." I studied the picture. The boy had the same dark eyes as the man, but there was something softer in his face, something open that was now hidden. "What about his mother?" I asked. Antonio's smile faded a little. "Maria died when he was 8. Cancer. It was just the two of us after that." He turned the page to show me more pictures. Marco graduating. Marco in a suit at what looked like a business opening. Marco standing beside his father at what must have been Antonio's birthday. Candles on a cake, but neither of them smiling much. "He takes care of me," Antonio said quietly. "Always has, but he forgets to take care of himself." A door opened somewhere in the house, and footsteps echoed on the wood floors. Antonio's face brightened. "Ah, speaking of my son." Marco appeared in the doorway. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, showing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us spoke. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. "We've had such a nice day," Antonio said, patting my hand. "Ellie loves the garden as much as I do." "Does she?" Marco came closer, looking at the photo album open on the table. A tiny smile touched his lips. "Showing her the embarrassing childhood photos already, Papa?" "Just the good ones." Antonio winked at me. I expected Marco to leave then, to go back to whatever important business filled his days. But instead, he sat with us. He asked about our day. He listened to his father's stories, even though he must have heard them 100 times before. And sometimes, when Antonio wasn't looking, his eyes would find mine across the table, curious and searching. Over the next weeks, a pattern formed. 3 days a week, the black car would pick me up after my morning shift at the diner. I'd spend the afternoon with Antonio, walking in the garden, watching old movies in a room with seats softer than my bed, or just sitting while he told stories about his life in Italy before coming to America. Sometimes Marco would join us. He never stayed long, but when he did, the room felt different, charged with something I couldn't name. He never talked about his work, and I never asked. But I noticed things. The way men in suits came and went from the house, the hushed phone calls, the gun I once glimpsed under his jacket when he reached for something on a high shelf. I knew what he was. Everyone in the city knew the Salvatore name and what it meant. But it was hard to remember that when I saw him helping his father up the stairs, or bringing him cannoli from the bakery across town that Antonio loved, or listening with endless patience to the same stories I'd already heard 3 times that week. "You're not what I expected," I said one evening as Marco walked me to the waiting car. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink behind the trees. "What did you expect?" he asked, his steps slow to match mine on the gravel path. "Someone colder." He looked at me, his face half in shadow. "We become what circumstances demand, Eleanor. But with my father..." He stopped, seeming to search for words. "With my father, I can remember who I was before." "And who is that?" I asked softly. Marco didn't answer right away. We reached the car and he opened the door for me. Just a boy who loved his mother and wanted to make his father proud. Before I could respond, rain began to fall, fat, sudden drops that pattered on the gravel. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. "You should go," Marco said, Storm's coming." As he spoke, lightning flashed again, closer this time. The sudden light showed a scar along his jaw that I hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing against it. Marco went very still. His skin was warm under my fingertips, the scar a ridge of smooth tissue. "How did you get this?" I whispered. He caught my hand, his fingers wrapping gently around my wrist. Our eyes met, and something passed between us. Something electric and dangerous and thrilling all at once. "Another life," he said, his voice low. "Another world." For a breathless moment we stood frozen in the falling rain. Then his phone rang, shattering the silence. He dropped my hand and stepped back, pulling the phone from his pocket. His face changed as he looked at the screen, hardened into something I barely recognized. "Get in the car," he said, his voice sharp with sudden urgency. "Now." "What's wrong?" I asked, alarm rising in my chest. "Just go," he said, already turning toward the house. "My father. Is he okay?" "He's fine. It's not that." Marco's eyes met mine one more time, and I saw worry there, maybe even fear. "I'll call you tomorrow." The drive home was long and quiet. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning turned the sky into broken glass. I watched the city appear through the wet windows, lights blurred and soft in the darkness. My fingers still tingled where they had touched Marco's scar. My heart still raced from the look in his eyes. I should have been afraid of what was happening. I should have asked the driver to take me somewhere else, anywhere else, and never come back. I was getting too close to a world I didn't understand, a world with rules written in blood. But all I could think about was Marco's face in the lightning flash, the feeling of his skin under my fingertips, and the strange hunger I'd seen in his eyes that matched the one growing inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my window, watching rain stream down the glass, feeling like I was standing on a cliff edge, about to step into empty air. I didn't know that at that very moment, Marco was fighting a battle I couldn't imagine. I didn't know that my simple touch had cracked something in him that he'd thought was sealed forever. I didn't know that somewhere in the city, people were making plans that would put us both in danger. All I knew was that I wanted to see him again, to touch that scar again, to find out what would happen if I stepped off that cliff and into the unknown. The black car didn't come the next day, or the day after. I called the number Marco had given me, but no one answered. At the diner, I dropped plates and mixed up orders, my mind far away in a garden where an old man was waiting for me. On the third day, just as I was hanging up my apron, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Car coming in 10 minutes. Pack a bag." My hands shook as I threw clothes into my old backpack. I didn't ask why I needed a bag. I didn't ask where I was going. Some part of me had been waiting for this moment since I first saw Marco standing in the diner doorway. The car that came wasn't the usual sleek black one. This was a plain gray car with tinted windows, and the driver was someone new, younger, with watchful eyes that kept checking the mirrors. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled away from my building. "Somewhere safe," he said, and nothing more. We drove for almost an hour, leaving the city behind. The sun set in a blaze of red and gold as we turned onto a narrow road that wound through thick trees. Finally, we came to a clearing where a house sat back from the road, smaller than Marco's mansion, but still bigger than any place I'd ever lived. Lights glowed in the windows, warm and inviting against the darkening sky. The driver led me to the door, which opened before we reached it. Marco stood there, his face tight with worry that softened a little when he saw me. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping back to let me in. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt, the first time I'd seen him without a suit. It made him look younger, more human. "Did I have a choice?" I asked. His eyes met mine. "Always." The house smelled of wood smoke and something cooking. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Where's Antonio?" I asked, looking around the cozy living room with its stone fireplace and soft couches. "Upstairs, resting." Marco took my backpack. "He's been asking for you." Before I could ask more questions, a door opened and a man stepped into the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples. His eyes narrowed when he saw me. "This is her?" he asked Marco, looking me up and down like I was something he might buy. "The waitress?" "Vincent," Marco said, his voice cooling. "This is Eleanor Price. Eleanor, this is Vincent Rossi, my right hand," Vincent finished for him. "The one who cleans up messes." He didn't offer to shake my hand. "Like this one." "Eleanor isn't a mess," Marco said quietly. "She's a guest." Vincent made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "A guest. Right." He turned and walked away, disappearing through another door. "Don't mind Vincent," Marco said, leading me toward the stairs. "He's protective. Of you? Of our family. Our business." He glanced at me. "He thinks you're a problem." A chill ran through me. "Am I?" Marco stopped on the stairs, turning to face me. We were eye to eye, with me one step below him. "You're unexpected," he said finally. Upstairs, Antonio was sitting up in bed, a book open on his lap. His face lit up when he saw me. "Ellie," he called. "Come in, come in. This house is so boring without you." I sat on the edge of his bed and let him hold my hands in his. His skin felt paper thin, the blue veins standing out like rivers on a map. "Are you okay?" I asked. "What happened? Why are we here?" Antonio glanced at Marco, who stood in the doorway watching us. "Just a little trouble," the old man said. "Nothing for you to worry about." But I did worry. Later, after Antonio had fallen asleep and I'd eaten a dinner of pasta so good it made me want to cry, I found Marco on the back porch. He stood at the railing, looking out at the dark woods beyond. A glass of amber liquid dangled from his fingers. "Tell me what's happening," I said, coming to stand beside him. The night air was cool on my skin, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Marco was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "There's another family, the Russos. They've been pushing at our borders for years. Testing me." He took a sip from his glass. "Now they're making a real move. Because of what happened at the diner?" He turned to look at me, surprise in his eyes. "You think this is about that? Isn't it? Those men who hurt Antonio. We're nobodies," Marco cut in. "Not Russo's men. Just stupid boys with too much money and not enough sense." His jaw tightened. "They've been dealt with." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. "Then why are we here?" I asked instead. "Why did I need to pack a bag?" Marco's eyes searched my face. "Because they know about you." The words fell between us like stones. "About me? How? Why?" "You've been seen with us. At the house. In the car." He set his glass down on the railing. "They think you're important to me." "Am I?" I whispered. Marco didn't answer. Instead, he reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my cheek. "You should go to bed," he said softly. "It's been a long day." I slept in a room next to Antonio's, in a bed softer than any I'd ever known. The sheets smelled like lavender, and moonlight spilled through the curtains, painting silver shapes on the floor. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind in the trees outside made me jump, and underneath it all was the memory of Marco's fingers on my cheek, the question I'd asked that he hadn't answered. Morning brought sunshine and the smell of coffee. I found Antonio in the kitchen, fussing over the stove while a young woman chopped vegetables nearby. She glanced at me with curious eyes but didn't speak. "Ah, there she is," Antonio said when he saw me. "Did you sleep well, my dear? Come, come, have some breakfast. Maria makes the best eggs in the world." We ate on the patio, watching birds dart among the trees. Antonio talked about the garden back home, about how his roses would be blooming now, about all the things he would show me when we returned. He talked as if nothing was wrong, as if we were just on a little vacation. But I could feel eyes on us. Men moved around the property, their shapes appearing and disappearing among the trees. Through the kitchen window, I could see Marco talking with Vincent, their faces serious, their voices too low to hear. After breakfast, I helped Antonio with a crossword puzzle. His hands shook too much to write, so I filled in the boxes as he called out the answers. We were laughing about a particularly hard clue when Vincent appeared in the doorway. "The old man needs his rest," he said, not looking at me. "I'm not tired," Antonio protested. "Doctor's orders," Vincent insisted. He stared at me. "Marco wants to see you, in the study." Antonio squeezed my hand before I left. "Don't let Vincent scare you," he whispered. "His bark is worse than his bite." But Vincent's eyes followed me as I walked down the hall, cold and watchful as a winter wolf's. The study was a room lined with books, a heavy desk by the window. Marco stood looking out at the trees, his back to me. When I entered, he turned. "Vincent doesn't like me," I said. "Vincent doesn't like anyone," Marco replied. But there was tension in his voice. "He thinks you're a weakness, a distraction. Is that what you think?" Marco's eyes softened. "I think you're dangerous in a different way." He took a step toward me. "Eleanor." The door burst open, and one of the men I'd seen outside rushed in. "Boss, we've got movement on the perimeter." Marco's face changed instantly, hardening into something I barely recognized. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gun. "Get her upstairs with my father," he ordered. "Lock the door. No one in or out until I come." "Marco," I started, fear rising in my throat. "Go," he said, not looking at me. "Now." The man grabbed my arm and pulled me from the room. As we hurried up the stairs, I heard car engines outside, tires on gravel, men's voices calling to each other. In Antonio's room, the old man was already standing by the window. "They're here, aren't they?" he asked, his voice calmer than it should have been. "The Russos." The guard locked the door behind us. "Stay away from the windows," he ordered. Then took up position by the door, his hand inside his jacket where I knew a gun must be. I helped Antonio to a chair far from the windows. His hands were cold in mine. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "So sorry you're caught in this, Ellie." "It's not your fault," I told him, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. "It is," he insisted. "Marco warned me. He said it was dangerous to bring you into our world. But I was selfish. I liked having you there." Below us, a door slammed. Men shouted. Something crashed. "He cares for you," Antonio said, squeezing my hands. "I haven't seen him look at anyone that way since—" A gunshot cracked the air. Then another. Antonio flinched, but his eyes stayed on mine. "Since his mother died," he finished, "you make him remember who he is beneath all the rest." More shots, breaking glass. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out, trying not to think about Marco down there in the middle of it all. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered. "Any of it. None of us asks for the lives we get," Antonio said gently. "We just live them the best we can." The gunfire stopped after 23 minutes. I counted each one as Antonio and I sat huddled in the corner of the room, far from the windows. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise, thick and heavy with waiting. My mouth felt dry as dust, and my heart wouldn't slow down no matter how many deep breaths I took. When the lock clicked and the door swung open, I jumped to my feet. Antonio's hand still clutched in mine. Marco stood there, a dark stain spreading across his left sleeve. His face was smeared with something that looked like soot, and a cut above his eye dripped blood down his cheek. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. "For now." Antonio let out a long, shaky breath and closed his eyes. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. "Sal took a bullet in the leg. Nothing serious." Marco's eyes found mine. "You okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The guard who'd stayed with us slipped past Marco and disappeared down the hall. Through the open door, I could smell smoke and something sharper. Something metallic that made my stomach turn. "We need to move," Marco said. "Get your things. We leave in 5 minutes." I helped Antonio pack his medicines into a small bag. My own backpack was still where I'd left it, untouched on the bed in the guest room. As I stuffed my toothbrush into a side pocket, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above the dresser. My face looked pale and strange, like it belonged to someone else. What was I doing here? This wasn't my life. Guns and guards and men who came to kill you in your home. Yet when Marco called my name from the hallway, I picked up my bag and went to him without hesitation. The ride back to the city was long and silent. We traveled in a convoy, 3 black SUVs with men I didn't know driving and riding shotgun. I sat in the back of the middle one with Antonio, who slept with his head against the window, exhaustion lining his face. Marco sat up front, talking in low tones on his phone, words I couldn't quite catch floating back to me. Perimeter, clean up, safe house. We didn't go to the mansion with its beautiful garden. Instead, we drove to a high-rise apartment building downtown, with a doorman who nodded to Marco and didn't look twice at the blood on his shirt. The elevator took us to the top floor, the penthouse, with windows that looked out over the whole city. It was beautiful in a cold way, all glass and steel and white furniture that had never been sat on. "You'll stay here tonight," Marco said, showing me to a bedroom bigger than my entire apartment. "There are clothes in the closet. Help yourself." "Where are you going?" I asked, suddenly afraid to be left alone in this strange place. "To take care of some things." His voice was flat, his eyes somewhere else. "I'll be back." After he left, I opened the closet to find women's clothes in my size, jeans, t-shirts, even a dress still with tags on it. I pulled out a soft gray sweater and held it against me, wondering who had chosen these things, who had guessed my size so perfectly. I showered in a bathroom with marble floors and a tub big enough to swim in. The hot water washed away the smell of smoke and fear, but not the memory of gunshots or the sight of blood on Marco's shirt. When I closed my eyes under the spray, I saw men falling, though I hadn't actually seen anyone get hurt. My imagination filled in the blanks my eyes had been spared. Clean and dressed in borrowed clothes, I went to check on Antonio. He was settled in his own room, propped up on pillows, a book open on his lap though his eyes kept closing as he fought sleep. "You should rest," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Too many thoughts," he said, patting my hand. "Too many ghosts." "Has it always been like this?" I asked. "The danger?" Antonio sighed, looking suddenly every one of his 82 years. "Not always. There were good years, when Marco was small, before Maria got sick. We were almost normal then." He smiled sadly. "But this life, it pulls you back, no matter how far you run." I thought about my own life. So simple, so boring just a few weeks ago. Waiting tables, writing my book no one would read, going home alone to my tiny apartment. Now here I was, hiding out in a penthouse after a shootout, wearing clothes someone had bought just for me, sitting with a man whose son killed people. What was I doing here? Antonio must have seen the question in my eyes. You don't belong in this world, he said softly. Marco knows that. It's why he tried to keep you at a distance. He didn't try very hard, I said. Antonio chuckled. No, I think he couldn't help himself. His face grew serious again. But now you have a choice to make, Ellie. A hard one. I knew what he meant. I could walk away. Go back to the diner, to my apartment, to my old life. Pretend none of this had happened. I'd be safe then, from bullets and men who came to kill you because of your name. Safe from the darkness I'd seen in Marco's eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. But would I be happy? The thought caught me off guard. Happy? When had happiness become part of the equation? The sound of the front door opening made me jump. Voices in the living room, Marco's and someone else's, rose and fell. Antonio touched my arm. Go, he said. I'll be fine. Just an old man who needs his sleep. In the living room, Marco stood with Vincent. They both turned when I entered. Vincent's eyes narrowed and he shook his head slightly. We'll finish this later, Marco said to him. This isn't something you can put off, Vincent replied, his voice hard. Russo won't wait for you to sort out your personal life. The way he said, personal life, like it was something dirty, made my cheeks burn. Marco's jaw tightened. I said later, he repeated, each word sharp as glass. Vincent looked at me once more, his eyes cold with dislike, then stalked past me toward the door. It closed behind him with a click that seemed too quiet for all the anger he'd carried out with him. Marco let out a long breath and rolled his shoulders, wincing when the movement pulled at whatever injury lay under his blood-stained sleeve. You're hurt, I said, taking a step toward him. It's nothing. He walked to a cabinet by the window and pulled out a bottle and a glass. The liquid glowed amber in the fading light as he poured. Doesn't look like nothing, I persisted. Have you had a doctor look at it? Marco almost smiled. Are you worried about me, Eleanor? Yes, I said simply. The single word seemed to catch him off guard. He set down his glass untouched and studied my face. You should go, he said finally. Back to your apartment. Your job. Your life. Is that what you want? He looked away. What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me. Marco ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing up in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. You don't understand what you're getting into. Then help me understand, I said, taking another step toward him. Tell me. His eyes met mine, dark with something that might have been pain or longing or both. My world is ugly, Eleanor. Violent. The things I've done. I know what you are, I interrupted. I'm not stupid. Then why are you still here? He demanded, his voice rising. Why aren't you running as fast and as far as you can? The question hung between us. I didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense anyway. All I knew was that the thought of going back to my old life made me feel hollow inside. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not ready to leave. Marco closed his eyes briefly as if my words had hurt him. When he opened them again, there was a new distance there. Vincent thinks you're a liability, a weakness. And what do you think? I think he's right. Marco picked up his glass and drained it in one swallow. My father was attacked because of me. My men were shot at because of me. And now you're in danger because I let you get close. You didn't let me do anything, I said, anger flaring suddenly. I chose to be here. I'm choosing now. It's not that simple. It is for me. Marco shook his head. You don't belong here, Eleanor. In this apartment, in this life. You belong in the sunlight, not in my shadows. Stop telling me where I belong, I snapped. I've spent my whole life being safe, being small, waiting for something to happen instead of making it happen. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I feel awake. Alive. Because you've been shot at? Marco's voice was bitter. Because you've seen blood? Because I've seen you, I said quietly. The real you. Not just what you want people to see. Marco turned away, but not before I saw something crack in his expression. A glimpse of pain so raw it took my breath away. The real me isn't someone you want to know, he said, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. I walked up behind him, close enough to catch the scent of smoke and something metallic that still clung to him. Let me be the judge of that. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Fear, maybe, or doubt. I held his gaze, letting him see the truth. I was afraid. Yes, but not of him. I should take you home, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I am home, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. For tonight at least. The fight seemed to drain out of him then. His shoulders sagged and he reached out to touch my face, his fingers gentle against my cheek. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Maybe, I said, but right now, this is where I want to be. Later, I lay awake in the strange bed, listening to the faint sounds of the city far below. My old life felt like a dream someone else had dreamed, flat and colorless compared to the sharp, bright danger of this new world. Part of me knew Marco was right. I didn't belong here. This wasn't my fight, my family, my war. But when I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I felt his fingers on my cheek. And I knew that walking away would hurt more than staying, no matter what came next. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to cover. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The bed was too big, the ceiling too high, the sheets too soft against my skin. Then it all came rushing back. The gunshots, the blood on Marco's sleeve, the choice I'd made to stay. I found clothes laid out on a chair by the door. Not the borrowed things from last night, but my own clothes, freshly washed and folded. Someone had been in while I slept. The thought made me shiver despite the warm morning sun. In the kitchen, Antonio sat at a large glass table, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up when I entered and smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Good morning, my dear, he said. Coffee? Maria made breakfast. There's eggs and those little pastries you like. I poured myself a cup of coffee that smelled better than anything we served at the diner. Where's Marco? Antonio's smile faded slightly. Business. He left early. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Last night felt like a dream now. The things we'd said to each other, the way he'd looked at me, the truth that had hung unspoken between us. He'll be back, Antonio said, watching my face. He always comes back. We spent the morning playing cards at the kitchen table. Antonio taught me an Italian game with rules that kept changing every time I started to win. His laugh was bright and warm in the sunlit room, making it easy to forget why we were here, in this fortress high above the city. Just after noon, the front door opened. I looked up, expecting to see Marco, but it was Vincent who walked in. His eyes swept over me coldly before turning to Antonio. We need to talk, he said. Alone. Antonio sighed and set down his cards. Ellie, would you mind giving us a moment? I went to my room and closed the door, but their voices carried through the walls, not clear enough to make out words, but I could hear the anger in Vincent's tone, the rising and falling of a heated argument. When the front door slammed, I waited a few minutes before going back to the kitchen. Antonio sat alone, looking tired and older than he had that morning. Vincent has strong opinions, he said when he saw me. About me? About Marco? About the family business? Antonio rubbed his face with gnarled hands. About what should happen next. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the door opened again. Marco walked in, followed by two men in dark suits who took up positions by the door. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes, but the blood was gone from his sleeve, replaced by a fresh shirt and suit. "We need to go," he said without preamble. "Now. Both of you." Antonio didn't argue. He just nodded and pushed himself up from his chair. "Where this time?" "The lake house," Marco replied, already helping his father gather his medicines. "It's ready." I stood frozen in the kitchen, feeling like I was watching a play I didn't know the lines for. "The lake house?" Marco looked at me, his eyes softer than his voice. "You're coming too. It's not safe here anymore." "Is anywhere safe?" I asked quietly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair point." The drive to the lake took 3 hours with a stop halfway to switch cars. No one explained why, and I didn't ask. Antonio dozed against my shoulder in the back seat while Marco drove, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. The two men in suits followed in another car, keeping a careful distance behind us. The lake house sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, hidden from the road by thick pine trees. It was smaller than the mansion, built of dark wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Behind it, the lake stretched out, blue and still in the afternoon light. "It's beautiful," I said as Marco helped me from the car. "My mother loved it here," he replied, his eyes on the water. "We came every summer when I was a boy." Inside, the house felt warm and lived in, with comfortable furniture and books lining the walls. Photos sat on every surface. Antonio and a beautiful dark-haired woman who must have been Marco's mother. A young Marco holding a fish nearly as big as he was. 3 generations of Salvatore men standing proud on the porch. While Marco helped Antonio settle into the main bedroom, I wandered onto the porch and stood looking out at the lake. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water with streaks of orange and gold. In the distance, a bird called, its cry echoing across the still surface. It was so peaceful here, so far from gunshots and blood and men who wanted to kill you because of your name. I heard the door open behind me but didn't turn. Marco's footsteps crossed the wooden boards until he stood beside me at the railing. "My father's resting," he said. The drive tired him out. I nodded, still looking at the water. "How long will we stay here?" "Until it's over." I finally turned to look at him. "What does that mean? Until what's over?" Marco's eyes were dark and unreadable in the fading light. Russo made his move. Now I make mine. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze ran through me. "What are you going to do?" "What I have to." He leaned on the railing, his shoulders tense. "What I've always done." I thought about the gun I'd seen him pull from the desk drawer, about the men who followed his orders without question, about the blood on his sleeve that might not have been his own. "There has to be another way," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Marco smiled without humor. "That's what my father used to say. Before he accepted what our life is." He straightened up and faced me fully. "This is who I am, Eleanor. What I am." "No," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. "It's what you do, not who you are." Something flickered in his eyes, a spark of something I couldn't name. "You see things that aren't there." "I see you," I insisted. "With your father. With me." Marco shook his head, but there was doubt in his face now. Uncertainty where there had been only grim resolve before. He reached out slowly and touched my cheek, his fingers warm against my skin. "If things were different," he began. The sound of a car engine cut him off. His hand dropped from my face and he was instantly alert, reaching inside his jacket where I knew a gun waited. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the edge of the porch to look down the driveway. A black car appeared between the trees, moving slowly up the gravel path. Marco relaxed slightly, his hand moving away from his jacket. "It's Sal," he said, "and Vincent." The men climbed out of the car. Sal, the one who'd taken a bullet in the leg, limped slightly as he walked toward the house. Vincent's face was grim in the fading light. "We need to talk," he called to Marco. "Now." Marco glanced at me. "Go inside, check on my father." I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't a child to be sent away when the grown-ups talked. But the look on Vincent's face, cold and hard as stone, made me hold my tongue. I went inside, but I didn't go to Antonio's room. Instead, I stood just inside the door, where I could hear the men talking on the porch. "The FBI contacted our source," Vincent was saying, his voice low but clear in the quiet evening. "They know about the girl." "What about her?" Marco's voice was sharp. "They approached her at the old man's doctor appointment last month." I could hear the satisfaction in Vincent's voice. "Did she tell you about that, boss? Did she mention the nice agents who offered to help her out of this mess if she helped them?" My heart stopped. The doctor's appointment. I remembered it clearly. The two men in suits who'd cornered me while Antonio was with the doctor. They'd shown me badges, asked questions I hadn't answered, offered help I hadn't taken. "What did she tell them?" Marco asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Nothing yet, according to our source," Vincent replied. "But they're persistent, and everyone has a breaking point." I backed away from the door, my legs shaking so badly I had to grab the wall for support. They were talking about me like I was the enemy, like I would betray them. Betray Marco. The porch door banged open and Marco stood there, his eyes finding mine instantly. He knew I'd been listening. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice flat. "The FBI approached you?" I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. "And you didn't tell me?" It wasn't a question. "I didn't tell them anything," I managed to say. "I swear, Marco, I wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" Vincent pushed past Marco into the house. "Wouldn't save yourself? Wouldn't take the deal they offered you?" He turned to Marco. "You know what needs to happen. We can't risk it." Marco's face had gone blank, a mask I couldn't read. For a terrible moment, I thought he believed Vincent, thought he believed I would turn on him, on his father. "Go check the perimeter," Marco said to Vincent, his eyes never leaving mine. "Take Sal." Vincent started to protest, but something in Marco's face stopped him. He left, closing the door behind him harder than necessary. We stood facing each other in the gathering darkness of the living room. Outside, the lake water lapped gently against the shore. Inside, the clock on the mantel ticked away seconds that stretched like hours. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marco asked finally, his voice softer than I expected. "I was scared," I admitted. "Not of you. Of all of this. Of being caught in the middle of something I don't understand." I took a shaky breath. "But I didn't tell them anything. I wouldn't." "Why not?" His eyes searched mine. "It would have been the smart move, the safe move." I thought about all the reasons. About Antonio's kind eyes. About the garden where we'd walked. About the gentle way Marco helped his father up the stairs. But most of all, I thought about the man standing before me now, asking me to explain a loyalty he didn't believe he deserved. "Because I love you," I said simply. The words hung in the air between us, true and terrifying. "I don't want the life you could give me. I want you." Marco closed his eyes briefly, as if my words had caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, there was something new there, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "Vincent's right about one thing," he said quietly. "Everyone has a breaking point." "Not everyone," I disagreed. "Not for the things that matter." Footsteps sounded on the porch, and Marco straightened, the mask slipping back into place. But his eyes stayed on mine, seeing me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time. "Stay with my father," he said. "I need to deal with this." As he turned to leave, I caught his arm. "Marco, whatever you're planning, don't." He looked down at my hand on his sleeve, then back at my face. "Why not?" "Because there's another way," I said. "There has to be." For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he covered my hand with his own. "If I believe that," he said softly, "I wouldn't be who I am." "Maybe it's time to be someone else," I whispered. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe," he agreed. Then he was gone, slipping out the door to where Vincent and Sal waited. I stood alone in the darkening room, the weight of what I'd said, what I'd admitted, settling around me like a cloak. I loved him. Despite everything, despite knowing what he was, what he'd done, I loved Marco Salvatore, and I had no idea what that meant for either of us. 1 year has passed since that night at the lake house. The villa where I sit writing these words smells of lemon trees and salt air from the sea that stretches blue and endless beyond our garden. Sicily in spring is all color and light, so different from the gray city I left behind that sometimes it feels like a dream. Antonio naps in his favorite chair under the olive tree, his straw hat tipped over his eyes to block the afternoon sun. At 83, he moves slower now, but his eyes are still bright with life and stories. Every morning, he tends his roses that climb the stone walls in splashes of pink and yellow and red. Every evening, he teaches me more Italian words that roll off my tongue like sweet wine. This morning, a letter came from Dina at the diner. She's running the place now, bought it from the old owner with money that appeared in her account from an anonymous investor. She asked when I'm coming back to visit. I wrote that I don't know, that life has a way of changing your plans when you're not looking. 8 months ago, I would have added that I miss her, miss the diner, miss my tiny apartment with its view of the brick wall. But the truth is, I don't. Some doors close behind you so completely that you can't even remember what was on the other side. The sound of a car on the gravel driveway makes me look up from my notebook. Marco is home earlier than expected. He's been gone for 3 days. Business in Rome, he said, not explaining further. He still doesn't share certain parts of his life with me, and I've learned not to ask about the phone calls that make him step outside, or the men who sometimes come to the villa with papers for him to sign and whispered words I'm not meant to hear. I watch him walk toward the house, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder in the warm afternoon. He stops to check on his father, bending to adjust the hat that slipped sideways on Antonio's face. The tenderness in the gesture makes my heart squeeze in my chest. This is the Marco that no one else sees. The one I fell in love with despite everything that should have kept us apart. He finds me on the terrace, my notebook open on my lap, my pen forgotten in my hand. His smile when he sees me still makes my breath catch, even after all this time. "Writing again?" he asks, dropping a kiss on my forehead before sitting beside me. "Trying to," I say, closing the notebook where I've been putting our story into words. "How was Rome?" "Hot. Crowded. Full of tourists." He loosens his tie and looks out at the sea. "I'm glad to be home." Home. Such a simple word for something that took us so long to find. I remember that night at the lake house, how everything changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Vincent had wanted to silence me, to remove the risk I posed. I heard him arguing with Marco on the porch, his voice rising with anger and fear. "She knows too much," he'd said. "She's a liability we can't afford." But Marco had made a different choice. He'd sent Vincent away, not just from the lake house, but from his organization entirely. "I trust her," he told Vincent. If you can't accept that, then we're done. What happened next would be in the newspapers for months. How Marco Salvatore, heir to one of the oldest crime families in the city, walked away. How he transferred legitimate businesses to trusted lieutenants. How territories were redrawn, agreements made, promises exchanged. Not all at once, of course. Nothing that big happens in a day, or even a month. There were meetings I wasn't part of. Phone calls that lasted hours, times when Marco came home with that cold, hard look that meant someone had pushed too far. Once he disappeared for a week, and when he returned, his knuckles were bruised and there was a new scar on his shoulder that he wouldn't explain. But slowly, steadily, he disentangled himself from the life he'd been born into. Not completely. Some threads can never be fully cut. But enough that we could breathe. Enough that we could leave. What are you thinking about? Marco asks now. His hand warm on mine. The day we left, I answer honestly. Do you ever regret it? He considers the question carefully, his eyes on the horizon where the blue of the sea meets the blue of the sky. I regret that it took me so long, he says finally, that I wasted so many years believing there was only one path for me. I turn my hand over to lace my fingers with his, feeling the simple gold band he placed there 4 months ago. The wedding was small. Just Antonio and a few friends in the garden of this villa that has become our sanctuary. No family from the old life. No connections to the name that still appears in the papers sometimes, usually alongside words like alleged and investigation. What about you? Marco asks. Do you regret choosing this life? Choosing me? I look around at the terrace with its pots of red geraniums, at Antonio sleeping peacefully in the garden, at the sea stretching out like a promise of endless possibilities. I think about the diner with its smell of grease and coffee, the apartment where I could hear my neighbors fighting through the walls, the half-written book I'd been too afraid to finish. I regret that the choice had to exist at all, I answer truthfully, but not making it. Marco lifts my hand to his lips, his thumb brushing over my wedding band. My father says I'm softer now. Is that bad? I ask, though I already know his answer. It should be, he says with a small wry smile. But it isn't. We sit in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the water. In an hour, Antonio will wake from his nap and shuffle into the kitchen to help Maria prepare dinner, insisting he knows the best way to make the sauce even though his hands shake too much to chop the tomatoes. We'll eat on the terrace as the stars come out one by one, in a sky far clearer than any I saw in the city. We are neither fully in his world nor mine, but in the small territory we've created between them, a place of compromise and constant vigilance, of unexpected peace and lingering danger. Marco still has business calls, still disappears sometimes for days. There are still men who watch the property, still whispered conversations that stop when I enter rooms. The past doesn't vanish. It just recedes like the tide, always there at the edges of our life together. Antonio calls to us from the garden, awake now and holding up a ripe tomato from his plants, proud as any child with a good report card. Marco's face softens as he watches his father, and I watch them both. These men who've become my family in ways I never could have predicted. He's happier here, Marco says. We both are. I think about the girl I was a year ago, afraid of taking chances, of stepping outside the neat, safe box I'd built around myself. I think about the first time I saw Marco, backlit in the diner doorway, and how something inside me had recognized him even then, before I knew who he was, or what he would come to mean to me. Do you think we would have found each other anyway? I ask. If those men hadn't come to the diner that day? If I hadn't stepped between them and your father? Marco thinks about it, his eyes thoughtful. I don't believe in fate, he says finally, but I believe in choices, and I would choose you in any life, in any world. The words warm me more than the afternoon sun. Even knowing everything that would happen, the danger, the FBI, Vincent's betrayal, especially knowing those things, he says, they showed me who you are when it matters most. Antonio calls again, more insistent this time, holding the tomato higher. Marco laughs, a free, open sound I never heard in those early days, and stands, pulling me up with him. Come on, he says. If we don't admire that tomato right now, he'll never let us hear the end of it. Hand in hand, we walk down the steps to the garden where the old man waits, his face creased with happiness at the simple joy of growing something beautiful from nothing but dirt and seeds and care. Some would call what happened to me Stockholm Syndrome. Others would say I was seduced by danger, by power, by the thrill of stepping into a world so different from my own. Still others would see a fairy tale, beauty taming the beast, love conquering all. The truth is both simpler and more complex than any of those stories. I chose this life, this man, this family, with all their sharp edges and dark corners. And despite everything, I would choose them again. Every morning when I wake beside Marco, watching the sun paint patterns on his sleeping face, I think about the waitress in the diner who was too afraid to finish her book, to reach for what she wanted, to step outside the boundaries of her small, safe life. She's gone now, that girl. In her place is a woman who knows that safety is an illusion, that life happens in the spaces where we risk everything for the things that matter most. A woman who finally finished her novel, the story you're reading now, and found her voice in a land of lemon trees and salt air and second chances. Sometimes love doesn't save you from darkness. Sometimes it just gives you the courage to walk through it together, toward whatever light waits on the other side.